I'm back with Cara O'Kane, and we're talking about the eighth in the series of the Best of All Ireland winners in the last 16 years. So we've kind of, for anyone who hasn't seen it, we basically have a knockout competition whereby, as you can see here on the screen, those are the draws from teams in the last 16 years. We're on fixture number 8, 2011 Dublin against 2019 Dublin. So you're talking about the start of this era of dominance under Pat Gilroy and the 5 in a row team under Gavin. So Cahir, what's your first instinct when you think of these two teams? It almost feels like, sure, it must be the 5 in a row team.
I think that was my first instinct, Shane. Like, I suppose we talked about this a wee while back, and then I pulled up my notes again, and I had picked 2019 Dublin, but I can't actually remember why I picked them. And the longer we talked about it there, it's just, yeah, it is your instinct. You know, any team that creates the kind of history that team created, it becomes very difficult to go against them. But equally, I suppose there's a recency bias in any of this. That, you know, the more recent something is, you can tend to get drawn away from the older team, and you know, we talk about history, like 2011 was as important to Dublin, almost probably more important, you know, because 2019 is a glory charge, and it's a legacy thing, but 2011 was just necessity. Like, Dublin just had to win in All Ireland at that stage, you know, when they were beating on the door. Funny watching Alan Brogan's Lake Regale not that long ago, and you know, him talking about, got to the point where they were starting to win games, and then they took a couple of bad defeats, the Start Learwigs game and the Tyrone quarter final, and it was just like, it got to the stage where they were thinking, you know, are we going to win in All Ireland now? You know, it's starting to, it was progressing, and then it just kind of hit the wall, and it looked like we might not get over the line here. And then, you know, you're in against the Kerry team with all that experience, and the way that the game goes, and it looks for a long time like it's going to be Kerry, and then obviously Dublin break it later on, and you know, just the sheer outpouring of what that meant to Dublin football was beyond what 2019 meant. No question about that.
Because I think back of 2011, that team, and they were at the end of what we can kind of call a Spice Boy era, when everyone, you know, it was the hype machine. Dublin would back down when you put it up to them. They'd had some narrow losses in the years before. Even 2010, they threw away a victory against Cork in the All-Ireland semi-final. They were in a great position, left it behind them. 2009, the start of the Earwigs. So for Pat Gilroy to go from that to winning an All-Ireland against the Kerry team that had won it, obviously Cork had won it in 2010, but they'd won 3 of the 4 before that. You still had players at the peak of their powers like the Gooch, Declan O'Sullivan, these lads. Whereas in 2019, the biggest obstacle for Jim Gavin was just keeping the show on the road, and keeping these players who, you know, a lot of them were at their peak, or probably at the far side of their peak, keeping them at that level for one more year to get over the line. Like, you could make a case that a couple of players, they're probably very much at the end of their tether at this stage. Whereas that Dublin team in 2011, Alan Brogan was hitting Footballer of the Year territory. Bernard Brogan was the reigning Footballer of the Year. They probably beat better teams on the way, whereas in 2019 Dublin had battered everyone to the floor. They didn't have this weight of history. Yes, they'd weighted history in 5 in a row, but that everyone thought they weren't good enough, that they had to question, were they good enough themselves. They were battering absolutely everyone, and then they had one good team to try and beat in the final. And if it wasn't for the red card for Johnny Clifford early on, that Dublin team probably would have coasted to victory the first day.
I don't know if they would have coasted.
They were up by 4 or 5 at that stage, but by the time of the red card.
Like, Kerry had the setup to give them their fill of it, you know, and like, again, talk about, you know, history is written by the winners, and you go back to even the replay, and that was 15 aside through the replay, and you know, the first half of that was just end to end as well, you know, brilliant game of football, and then the goal happens. But for so much of that second half, even though Dublin held the lead 3, 4, 5 points, like Kerry came at them again, and they had their goal chances. And obviously Kerry missed the penalty when it was 15 aside in the drawn game. They had another chance that Stephen O'Brien flashed over the bar on his left foot, which could have been a goal. Obviously, they had the attacking powers to trouble that Dublin team, and like what you're saying about a few of the Dublin team kind of holding on towards the end, that's definitely true, because it was the first year that we had seen a big personnel switch in their defence. Like I remember writing a piece the week before the final about Dublin's power five in defence. Obviously McCarthy, Cooper, McMahon, O'Sullivan, and who's the fifth? Can't remember now. There was five of them that had started all of the All Ireland finals, barring maybe one of them had missed one.
Philly McMahon.
I'm working from memory here. Philly McMahon. I think I mentioned him. That wasn't. But whoever the five of them, between the five of them, they'd only missed one start in the All Ireland final since 2013, and 2019 was the year that we saw the real breakup of that. Where Johnny Cooper struggled and got sent off in the drawn game, where Philly McMahon didn't start the games. You started to see the time was taking its toll on that defence, and so we ended up, in the replay, the full back line was Owen Merchant, Davy Byrne, and Michael Fitzsimons, which doesn't jump off the page at you in the same way, and yet Davy Byrne's form over 18 months has been outstanding. Owen Merchant obviously had a huge impact on the replay, and Michael Fitzsimons is pound for pound one of the best defenders in the country, if not the best, out and out defender in the country at this stage. So, and that just highlights how good they are at transitioning from one team to the next, and that's something that they've done through Pat Gilroy's reign, the like of Niall Scully and the like of Brian Howard and Con O'Callaghan. These boys, it is just the most seamless of passages, or it seems that way. That they come in, they get established, and the team keeps running around them, and the next thing you know, they're playing their 10th championship game. They've won all 10, and they're an established player, and you've barely even noticed it happening. But and that's how it happens for them, and they're it's been a huge strength for them. But individually, is their defence as strong now as it was certainly in the earlier part of Jim Gavin's reign? But is it as strong as it was in 2011? You go through it. Cian O'Sullivan, Rory O'Carroll, obviously at that stage probably the outstanding defender in the country, and a young Fitzsimons who wasn't as established. McCarthy, Ger Brennan, and Kevin Nolan, who had a great year in the great final in 2011. So, is the current defence as good as that?
Well, the question then is that football has changed so much in those 8 years that Dublin back then played a very different system to how they play now. I mean, it's probably much closer to that traditional formation that we all think of, 6-2-6. Whereas now it's come almost unrecognisable. At times, Brian Howard wearing the number 12 shirt, sitting back in front of his own full back line during the All-Ireland in 2019. So in some ways are they incomparable. Like even Stephen Cluxton, that 2011 Stephen Cluxton, he hits the free to win the All-Ireland. He's no longer hitting frees now. Is that down to Dean Rock just taking over and not the necessity? But like, can Stephen Cluxton in 2019 still knock over that pressure free? I mean, I don't know. He probably could, but like, it is like football's a different game. So to even just pick a lad and say he's not necessarily as good a defender, well, he doesn't need to defend the same way as a guy back in 2011.
Oh, it's a good point. Like it's very true, because, and I think we saw a wee bit of evidence in the second half of that drawn game, especially where it was, to my mind, the first time since Donegal in 2014 that we've seen Dublin's defence as exposed, and it was simply they were a man short, and for periods after the goal they were chasing the game a man short, and so they had to do it on their own. Now, I remember highlighting, you know, even though Clifford still got a couple of scores, and still did fair, I thought the job that Fitzsimmons did on Clifford in the second half of that drawn game was outstanding. Given that, as you say, even Johnny Cooper was all over the place with a man in front. He had all the protection and all the cover. And then in the second half, Fitzsimmons moved on to him, and there was 50 yards of space. And Fitzsimmons, like, I can remember, like, sitting up in the press box in the Hogan stand, kind of glued to that battle because of Clifford's movement and trying to see how Fitzsimmons was going to cope with that movement and all of that space. There was an absolute ocean in front of David Clifford, and Fitzsimmons coped unbelievably well. Unbelievably well. When I love, Sky Sports did a player cam a few years ago, if you remember, like had there been a player cam trained on those two, just fascinating watching. And, things that you don't see Fitzsimmons do. You know what I mean? If you're watching TV, all you see is the ball, the camera following the ball and the ball being kicked in and whether he wins it or not. But it was just the way he stopped Clifford running into the areas that he wanted to run into. Fitzsimmons' intelligence to know the ball was coming one side and there's not enough angle there. You can see his thought process. There's not enough angle there for them to kick a diagonal, so I'll stand a yard on this side where Clifford can't get out past me. And then the move goes on and he has to just absolute brilliant textbook defending. And he is, I've sort of gone into a wee love rant there about Mike Fitzsimmons, but he's just brilliant. I think he's great to watch.
I'll send this on to Michael Fitzsimons afterwards. We'll look at this. We'll look at the adversity that the Dublin teams faced in those two finals, both against Kerry. But first of all, I'll just kind of quickly run through the paths that they both had to the final. So in 2011, Dublin had to beat Laois, and they beat them by 8 points. Then narrowly edged past Kildare by a point, beat Wexford by a goal that day. James McCarthy scored that goal, of course. Then you move on to the quarter-final. And this was the day that Diarmuid Connolly scored 7 points from play. And probably everyone knew he was a brilliant footballer. But this was the first day that he truly delivered in a massive championship game. Then that vomit semi-final against Donegal, 8 points to 6. And of course, obviously winning the final against Kerry. Whereas if you jump forward to 2019, I mean, Leinster was a joke. 5-21 to 10 points against Louth. And I mean, so are you going to give kudos for Dublin beating slightly better opposition in 2011, or for just being so far ahead of the pack in 2019? Like, you go on to beat Kildare 26 points to 11, Meath 117 to 4 points, then go to the Super 8s 518 to 117 over Cork. Albeit Cork were in that game for long spells. Then battered Roscommon 226 to 14. And then you obviously had the shadow teams, the shadow team beating Tyrone's shadow team in Omagh. Then hammer Mayo and get into the All-Ireland final and beat beat Kerry at the second asking. So before we talk about the adversity in the finals, because both teams had to come from difficult situations to win, who do you think had the tougher path?
Like you say about the Leinster Championship being pathetic at this stage and being so much stronger in 2010, and I don't know, was it so much stronger or just more competitive, in that Dublin hadn't probably realised any of their potential. And also, one of the biggest factors in Dublin annihilating Leinster is their physical prowess, their fitness and their ability to just cut you across the ground in Croke Park. And in recent years, and other teams haven't been able to get to that physical level and haven't been able to cope in Croke Park and just have been overwhelmed. Dublin in 2011 probably, you know what I mean? In general, Gaelic football it was getting there, but it wasn't at the same physical level that it is now. And like there were still obviously Meath in 2010, but the 5 goals past Dublin that year. But were Meath any further forward at that stage? You know what I mean? As a do you know what I mean? They weren't an All-Ireland contender. They weren't a team that was going to trouble Division 1, or they weren't. So it's gauging exactly how strong. What I'm saying is Leinster now are some of the like, look at Meath last year. Like the Leinster final was maybe not a great spectacle, and ultimately it ended up quite comfortable for Dublin. But like, Meath kept Dublin to 5 points in the first half. 5 points, like that attack, and they did that largely playing like as close to man as you could get in modern football.
Their full back line was
Defensively,
brilliant that day, especially the first half.
defensively, Meath are a very, very good team. They as it showed that day, they didn't have the forwards to really put it to Dublin, and that's going to be their problem going forward. Like, but in terms of gauging what Dublin beat, are the teams around them in Leinster as good now as they were in 2010? And does that make the results now, better? That Dublin are just so far ahead. So you're kind of arguing the point that in 2010 they had to beat better teams because they were closer games, and I would maybe contend that they weren't necessarily that much better teams. Dublin just hadn't quite found their stride and their level in terms of their ability to blow teams away and their tactical setup that has been so prevalent in recent years.
But the point I would make is that Pat Gilroy was taking a team that had lost the year before against Meath, and Dublin didn't have the same belief in themselves as serial All-Ireland winners that we can just coast through Leinster. So he actually, if you were to sort of compare and contrast, it was more of an achievement to even win Leinster in 2011 than it was now. I mean, I know they battered Wexford in the 2008 Leinster final, but this was a Wexford team that actually got to an All-Ireland semi-final just a couple of years ago, whereas none of these teams in Leinster in the last number of years are really making any sort of a rip.
Look, it's a slightly different point, and I agree with you on that point. That it's definitely a bigger achievement for Dublin to win Leinster in 2011 than it is now, but that's down to Dublin and not the rest of them. Mostly down to Dublin, not the rest of them, because Dublin, had to find ways to win at that stage. As we said, they'd lost a lot of big games. They'd missed out on Leinster titles they might have won and different things, and like all the quality in the world. Look at that team. Look at that starting 15 in 2011, but they still were going in to the final as fairly considerable underdogs against that Kerry team, which is overlooked a wee bit at times too. That everybody forgets that Dublin weren't favourites. That because these All Irelands all kind of get lumped in on top of each other, and you think that Dublin were just railroading everybody. But in 2011 was the one time that they probably had to go the other way, and obviously the pattern of the game probably reflected that for right up until McManaman's goal.
So then talk about the adversity in both finals. So the first day, Colm Cooper spun Michael Fitzsimons beautifully, ends up getting a nice hand pass, finishes a lovely goal. Kerry are basically in a winning position coming down the stretch. Ger Brennan easily could have been sent off, I think everyone knows. Then Kevin McManaman gets the goal, they turn it around. But it's not like, when Kevin Nolan equalised that all of a sudden they were obviously going to go on and win. I think Bernard Brogan then scored a lovely point. Kieran Donaghy scored one of the greatest points I've ever seen from under the Cusack.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. Before
ultimately, did he mean it?
I give him credit now. I think to be a mean enough man tries to take that one away from him.
It was some skyscraper. Like, it'd probably come up above the roof of Croke Park at some point and back down in.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And whereas then, so that's kind of winning in serious adversity. You had been behind early on. The blow of the goal when you've never won an All-Ireland, certainly none of this team. And then you jump forward to 2019 and they were in a winning position. You get the red card. All of a sudden, Kerry are all over you. You have Stephen Cluxton coming out to take up space. You're behind late on with 14 men and you dominate the last 10 or 12 minutes. And you obviously go on to win the replay and keep Kerry at arm's length, I would say, late in the game. For sure, but like who overcame the biggest adversity?
I think it goes back to what each team was at the point that they achieved it. The there's a horrible phrase that Liverpool fans use, and I hate Liverpool fans at the minute, but they talk about mentality monsters, and oh no, don't talk like it makes me shiver, but that's you'd apply that across to the Dublin of 2019, like that, and it's been their arguably one of their greatest strengths is just that ability to not get beat when they should get beat. They've won, all right, they've railroaded teams, and there's been other games that they've come out of and deserved to win. But they've, like every team, they've won games they maybe didn't deserve to win, and they've drawn games they didn't deserve to draw. And that ability to just, and I mean, the only way you could describe last year the drawn game was they just hounded Kerry down. They were like a pack of rabid dogs after a rabbit down a hole. Like, they were just they just were not going to give up until they caught it. And it was just a remarkable period, those last few minutes of that game. Like the noise in the place, it was just chaos. The place was chaos at that stage, and it was the kind of in-game bravery, because we associate Dublin with being in Leeds and seeing games out, and sometimes you don't see them having to do this, and that coming out of their comfort zone. And I think you go back to 2014, having to chase a game. In 2014, it really troubled them. I think they didn't know what to do against Donegal when they found themselves 5 or 6 points down, and they thought, Jesus, and they started to kick wild shots, and they started to panic, and they did things that they don't normally do. And I think that's been their progression, and that's where they're at now, that they don't panic. And they just, even though they hadn't been in the situation all that often, they knew what to do. They knew how to go and get Kerry last year, and part of that was Stephen Cluxton coming and playing full back and pushing another man up and making it an outfield 14-on-14 battle again, which was very brave but absolutely essential. Had they not done that, I don't think they'd have got their draw. I don't think they'd have won.
So if we're to try and make a decision on this one of the things we decided to do was try and pick a combined 15 of the two, and that gives a fair indication. So I think you have it there, do you?
I do. Well, what we sort of loosely agreed on was even though we kicked the decisive free in 2011, this is my argument now that I went for Cluxton 2019. Maybe you still disagree with that.
I'm kind of torn because of the fact of the free in I think that free in 2011 kind of gives you an awful lot, towards that version of Cluxton. But I do accept your point that maybe, and he did win Footballer of the Year, so I suppose I'll just about bow to your wisdom there.
I think it was the best season of his career, to be honest. We had Cian O'Sullivan from 2011, Rory Carroll from 2011, and 2019 Fitzsimmons. We had Jack McCaffrey, John Small, and then we were a wee bit undecided over we'll come back to that. We had Fenton, Michael Darren McCauley, Paul Flynn from 2011, Diarmuid Connolly from 2011, and Kilkenny. And then we had the two Brograns from 2011 and Con O'Callaghan. And their other wing half back slot. Because, I mean, the obvious place to go is James McCarthy. Over his entire career, you would never be leaving him out of an all-time Dublin team. I just don't think he had his best year last year, and he probably didn't have his best finals. And then obviously you're looking at Kevin Nolan, who was man of the, I think he was man of the match in 2011.
He was man of the match, and he got an All-Star. Whereas, I think in the Irish news, I'd say your player ratings McCarthy probably didn't get as much as he got in other years. Like, there was one year he got man of the match in the All Ireland, and nobody would dispute how brilliant he is.
Oh, look, McCarthy has had huge games and big games for Dublin down the last year. I say, you're picking a best, possibly a best ever Dublin team, you would go hard to go past them. But if you're literally boiling it down to the seasons of 2011 and 2019, you're into an argument, and you could definitely, you could justify Kevin Nolan. Even though McCarthy obviously played in both, he played in 2011 as well.
A lot of people would say, how could you have Michael Darragh-Macaulay ahead of of James McCarthy. And if you were to go with the entirety of the career, of course you wouldn't. But he
Oh
was a
yeah,
big
but
part of
totally.
that back then, Macaulay.
Oh, Macaulay was just, he was the guy. I remember watching him coming up and thinking he's the strangest looking midfielder because he was the most uncomfortable man soloing the ball, and he just looked so awkward, and yet he was just such a powerful specimen, and he was this absolute. He was just a walking tank round the middle of the field, like, and he just ran straight through men. And it didn't matter that he couldn't solo the ball because he soloed it up and he caught it again and he just ran straight through whoever was going to tackle him. So, you seen him scoring goals and getting in. Like at that point of his career, he was in on goal chances. He was in, probably scored a lot of points from close range too. That was where he found himself, and it was that ability to just power, and obviously the massive impact on different, even reaching out and touching that ball in 2013 in that semi final against Kerry. Like he was, he ended up winning Footballer of the Year later on in his career, but he was huge, huge asset to that team at that time.
Would you don't have Paul Mannion in the team either. I think both like Bernard Brogan back around 2011, 2010, and obviously for a few years either side of that was very, very good. So, but at the same time, leaving him out, and I know Alan Brogan got Footballer of the Year, but geez, it's hard to leave him out.
In fairness, like you kind of threw Con up using your Kula bias there, and I didn't really argue, but but
Well, make a
like
case for dropping Khan if you like, though.
because I'm a huge fan of Mannion's, and the thing, but to be fair, there are a few more explosive players, and again, we're going back to the argument on the basis of 2019. I think you'd be going with Con, as opposed to Mannion. But again, if you're picking a Dublin team of the last 10 years and it's down left to those two to put into a slot, I still think I would maybe go with Mannion. Um, Even though I think O'Callaghan just has maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, and that's he's achieved so much. Jesus, people could only dream of achieving what he's achieving, but he's still very young. And Mannion has done so much as well. He just obviously didn't have the same club success, and that O'Callaghan, his role of honour is massive, but a lot of it because of the club too. And like Mannion has been absolutely essential to Dublin. Um, you know, they went through a wee spell when Alan Brogan retired, when Bernard Brogan went off the boil, when Dean Rock wasn't just as consistent as he is now. They kind of went through a spell where they didn't really have a talisman, and he gave it to them. He gave them that real source of scores. Like 2018, like he was very, very, very hard to mark. There were no defenders like to see Paul Mannion coming for those couple of years, and then you have his work rate and all the rest that he does too. So, but on 2019 alone, I'm going to have to let you win on that one.
Very gracious of you. So, how many 2019 players and how many 2011 players do you have in that combined team?
So we had one, two. We didn't decide on a wing back then. Did we go Nolan or McCarthy?
I think based on Nolan's season in 2011, like I would always pick McCarthy in my greatest ever Dublin team in probably wing back.
Yeah.
But I think on the virtue of just that season alone, probably Nolan edges it for me, and probably plenty of people will freak out over that.
Well, so that leaves us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, there you go, seven 2019 and 8 2011. So it's split down the middle pretty much.
8 2011. So 2011 is just about getting it here.
2011. So we have O'Sullivan, O'Carroll, Nolan, Michael Dara, Flynn, Connolly, and the two Brogans.
Well, I think people can kind of vote at their feet on our game.ie. Underneath the video, there'll be a poll to let us know who you think won this one. I actually do think that the 2019 team, if you put them out on the field against 2011 team, 19 would win. But I think the achievement of 2011, considering the 16 years without winning it, not having the belief that you were good enough, and trying to manufacture that, I'd just about give it to the 11 team. What's your final thought on it?
It's probably hard to argue, to be fair. Like, it's probably hard to argue. Like, that was some weight of pressure, 16 years, and and it is a damn good Dublin team, with some damn good forwards. And yeah, I've always said, that the Dublin of 2019 are more methodical and great at what they do, and so tactically aware and all the rest of it. But no, I'd maybe just say 2011 as well.